All right, welcome everybody. So, welcome to everybody around the world. That's what I usually say, and welcome to my subscribers. So, I've shared this story a couple times before, but I don't think I have those videos still up. But I'll have one video here today devoted to this miracle, and instead of me keeping it to myself, um, I will share it with the world to help, you know, to act as testimony. It's a true story, 100% true. It's not going to be exaggerated or fabricated in any way. And it'll give reassurance and confidence to everyone else out there, believers, and even those coming to belief, just in the reality of God and Jesus, and that God is listening to our prayers and that He can answer them. Doesn't necessarily mean He's going to answer all of them or any specific one at any given time that we want, but that God does answer prayers. I mean, this one prayer, once you hear the story, I mean, it's out of this world. It's only it could only be a divine miracle. There's no other way to put it. Um, so, anyways, it'll give everybody confidence, and that's why an assurance. It helps strengthen your faith and your belief, and it's dead real. So, my grandfather is dead now. He died a few years ago. He lived until his 90s. He was a very devout Christian person. Him and my grandmother were like perfect. I literally everything that I seen in my long life that I spent with them, they were perfect, like perfect people. I mean, like squeaky clean to the level of like Jesus, right? And I didn't know them when they were younger and whatever, right? But they were upstanding people, like exemplar. I would never even come close to being like them because I've already done worse. But the point is that my grandfather, my grandfather was an upstanding Christian. He was his whole life. He did go and fight in the war. He actually helped sink the final Nazi battleship that helped win the war. He was a gunner on the boat and shot those big cannons. Um, so he risked his life for everybody. So he had that, but war is terrible, and ironically, war is tied to the story here in a strange way because it was such a traumatic time for him. So, anyways, as my grandfather got up into his 90s, he started to have, I mean, he had excellent health. Like him and my grandma were like blessed by God, maybe because of how good they were as Christians, just like great people. They were blessed, like blessed all the way up into their 90s, both of them. And they both passed peacefully in their sleep, which was another prayer that I asked that was granted. Well, God gave it to them, it had nothing to do with me, but I prayed for it and it actually did happen. But that's minor compared to this miracle. But in the years before he passed, he started to get um, heart attacks, right? So, you can have little heart attacks that don't kill you, right? You can have lots of little heart attacks and not even know that you've had them, right? A lot of people don't know the reality of heart attacks and, the science and the knowledge about them, right? I didn't until, we went through things with my family. So, anyways, you can have, I think they're called silent heart attacks or something, right? But nonetheless, it's the big, bad, and long-lasting ones that kill you, right? So you can have lots of little ones and very scary ones that are like kind of towards the deadly one. You know what I mean? Some people just think, oh, heart attack means you're going to die. It's not necessarily the case, but it's a terrifying thing to go through. I've gone through something like that many years ago, and I know what it's like to get that feeling where it's like your ribs are being like crushed, and you can't breathe. I think it's because you're going into cardiac arrest, and your heart like stops for a while, and the fear and the panic in your body is overwhelming, right? So, and it also hurts, right? So, I can only relate to it because of what I've gone through, right? So I know it's a traumatizing experience when you actually have, like a tangible heart attack. So he started to have some of them. Um, and he also had some false alarms, like, it was gas trapped behind his heart. I get that too. And that can feel like you're being stabbed in the heart. And it really, really hurts. And it's scary as well. It's not to the same level as a heart attack, but he was getting kind of both. So we had a lot of times we would run him to the hospital, right? And the ambulance would always have to come and this and that there. So that was unfortunate, but that's what we went through with my grandpa. It happened maybe 4 or 5 times, something like that. And he ended up in the hospital and they're checking him out. And at first, they said that they were all heart attacks. We found out, years later that not all of them were. Some of them actually were false alarms. But because, you can have minor heart attacks, the hospital kind of made that mistake, right? No harm intended. But he did have some real heart attacks. So, anyways, one day he had one that was a real bad heart attack. Like it would have killed most other people. It probably, I don't like saying this, but it could and would have and should have killed my grandfather. So, long story short, the heart attack that day was so bad that it took, it killed 85%. This is what the hospital told us. 85% of his heart died, like the heart tissue died as a result of the heart attack, right? He only had 15% living heart tissue left after the heart attack. Okay? So because he was having these episodes and these little attacks leading up to this, okay, they're literally the day before he actually had the real one. Like I didn't know he was going to have a real, a mega heart attack. Um, it was in the back of my mind, like it might happen one day and may happen one day soon, right? So the night before his real heart attack, I said a prayer to God and I asked God, I said, if my grandpa's gonna die, I always firmly believed that my grandpa would stay alive with me and the rest of my family. Most of them have died now, unfortunately. But that we'd all be here for when Jesus rise. Even my grandpa told me that's what he's always wanted, right? So because he was such a good Christian and he'd been blessed with such good health his whole life, he had some problems, right? But I mean, um, like his hands would always shake and like for decades, and he couldn't even hold like a teacup, and things like that will get to you. And very feeble and everything, right? But good health otherwise. I always just not took it for granted, but I always just felt like God would keep him here and just keep him going. You know what I mean? He stood in pretty good in his 90s. Um, but once these heart attacks happened, I had to face the reality that he might die. So all this, like childish or hopeful belief that my grandpa's just always going to be around, I had to face the reality that he could die, that he would die. So I said this very important prayer to God, like super important prayer. And I said to God, if my grandfather does die, okay, and you're the judge, I don't know what he's done in his life, I think he's a wonderful person, I would expect that he goes up to heaven, right? But you're the judge and might know things I don't know. And if my grandfather is going to go to hell, even if he's just going to go there, I know people believe some different things, right? I'm just saying, and I considered all things. I said, I know my grandpa's a great person, but if he's done some things that would make him worthy of punishments and whatever, and if he's going to go down into hell, even just for a short period of time, even if it's just for minutes, I felt so bad picturing, because I've had experiences before, where it was like I was in, I've had experiences before, and I didn't want my grandfather to have to go through terrifying things. I also didn't want him to be condemned and stuff like that. So I asked God, like, pretty sure my grandpa's not evil, right? But if he's going to be punished or even just transfer through a place like hell, okay, and see these type of terrible things like the demons and the fire and this and that there, and the loneliness and feeling, lost from the world and from everybody, and feeling lost, you know what I mean, all these terrifying feelings that people don't even think about. They just focus on, oh, fire and pain and scary demons, but there's all this other stuff like psychological stuff and torment that you would go through as well, right? And it was hurting me to think that my grandpa might experience that, even if God was just going to dip him in a tiny bit of punishment and allow him through the pearly gates. I was asking God, I said, please, if my grandfather's going to go through anything, right, please deliver him from that so he doesn't have to go through it, right? Please rescue him from there, right? And, acknowledging that God is the judge, you know what I mean? But I was just pleading and petitioning God. And I said specifically that if my grandfather does have to, for any reason, whether it's because he's being punished for it or just passing through the place, like, you know what I mean? Maybe it's just part of the science of what we will see or go through. I don't know. I'm not God. I'm just saying I was considering all things for the sake of my grandfather, because I loved him. And I was like, if he does experience a hellish place for any reason, please send an angel, send Jesus, just send somebody to come down there and rescue him from there, so he doesn't have to go through that, right? Acknowledging that, hey, if God says no, he deserves to go to hell, he's going to go to hell, then whatever, I'm not going to tell God no, right? But that was my pleading to God. That night, my grandpa had the mega heart attack. Okay, so we get the call, I think it was in the middle of the night. At that time, every time I went, in those weeks, every time I went to bed, I was worried I was going to get woken up by another phone call saying that grandpa's died. So I got the phone call in the middle of the night. My mother and everybody was crying. We're like, oh, we have to get to the hospital. He's had, mega heart attack, and he could die at any given moment, or he might be dead, something like that. So we raced over there, and that's when the hospital told us, did all the scans. My grandpa's in the bed. They said he's alive right now, but you have to be prepared because he could die at any moment, right? They said we expect him to die in the next few days, right? He will be dead in the next few days. 85% of his heart died from the heart attack. They said it was a mega heart attack, huge. Mega wasn't the word they used, right? And only 15% of his heart's alive. So he had just enough, I guess, to keep him ticking over and keep him alive. That's not much heart tissue, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. So he was in the hospital bed. So my whole family was there. Now, my grandfather, even though he fought in the war and sunk battleships and all that there, he didn't like talking about the war and everything that I saw. That was when he was younger, right? He went to war when he was like 18 as well, which is crazy, or 17, something like that. With either him or his brother kind of like cheated a little bit because they really wanted to help, and they went to war like 6 months ahead of the proper date. Well, it's done now, and both of them are dead, so you know what I mean. But he helped sink he sunk the final Nazi battleship. So what are they going to do? Take away his honor because he cheated? But he went to war early. But as everything I saw him in his life, he was very meek and soft and gentle and mild, right? Very, very mild. He didn't have like a persona of somebody who could, sink boats and take hundreds of lives in war, right? So, and he was on the ground, like in France and stuff, with weapons as well, right? With his brother as well. So, and he saw atrocities there. He didn't want to speak to me. Anyways, he didn't want to talk about it. He started crying and stuff. And he's like, I don't ever want to talk about it. And he's like, it was the only time I ever asked him about the war. I said, what was the war like? Can you tell me about the war? And he talked about, I met up with my brother on the ground in France. It was like a miracle. We asked, please let us, because they're actually, one was fighting for Canada, one was fighting for Britain, different armies. And they're like, oh, please let us link up, and they ended up meeting up with each other. And this is back then before they had like satellite comms, and they might have walkie talkies. But I don't know how they did it, but they met up, and they're going to in France. And he started telling me about that and seeing all the. He said there was women and children and people dying on the side of the road and begging and like crying for help as they had to walk by, but they had a mission, and you can't stop and help everybody. It's a time of war. And he said, as soon as he started to mention that, he's just like started crying, and he was just like, I don't ever want to talk about this again. He got angry and upset. So I don't know what he experienced in the war, but I could only imagine. But everything I saw in his life, he was so gentle. Like in my life when he was alive, he was very, very gentle. He didn't curse ever, not one curse word ever, like ever, like Ned Flanders. Never once like raised his voice, like really ever, like never raised a hand ever. Just like everything subdued and just like super calm and Jesus like, right? Like perfection. So he was never one to like tell me things like that would scare me or like about himself or mortify me. Well, he had good health all the time before, but never in my life did my grandpa ever do what he was about to do with me. So when we're all in the hospital, in the hospital room, he's in the bed. My family was all to one side. They had started talking. My grandpa was in the hospital bed. He grabbed my arm and he said, oh, I have to tell you something. So he whispered so that nobody else would hear. So it was a little unusual, right? But then he started to tell me, and he started breaking down and crying as he did it, because it was sincerity, and this was him. He felt like he was going to die or whatever, or he had almost died, right? And he knew he was probably going to die, and he could die anytime soon, from what the hospital was telling him. So he's crying and all that emotion and stuff, and he said, or he could have been crying from what he's about to tell me, but he said, in whispering so that nobody heard, he says, I had a very big or very bad heart attack, and I died. And I was like, what? And he said, I died. And he said, when I had it, he said, everything went black. And then all of a sudden, I was surrounded by flames and fire. And I started to get really scared. I was just like, what? This is exactly what I didn't want my grandfather to go through. I never even, like, if anybody asked me, even God, like, my grandpa was so perfect. And the whole life that I saw with him, I would be surprised if he even did go through anything like that. So I was like scared and like, why would he go through this? So he's like, I was surrounded by flames and fire. And he started telling me a little bit about it. And he said there are these like horrific demons, like grotesque, monstrous demons and monsters, like all around. And they're grabbing him, holding him down, and tying rope around his like wrists and his legs, and like, I think, chains. And they're like tying him up like he was a pig or an animal, and they're dragging him away to torture or to kill him. And there's like flame and fire everywhere. And I was just like, he was telling me this, and he was crying, like, as he told me, but he's still whispering, right? And he was like holding my hand, and he was like, he could die as he tells me this type of thing, right? So he's in there telling me, and then well, he didn't. I don't recall him saying like he prayed to God for help or anything like that. There, um, it's just like he was suffering, and he was so scared, and they were dragging him away, to go kill him. He even said that, to like torture or to kill me or something. And I was so scared. And he probably was begging God for help and stuff. I just remember him saying, "Oh, I said a prayer." But then he said, all of a sudden, this tunnel of light, like all this light started to appear, and then it like formed like a tunnel of light. And he said this man started walking down through the tunnel of light, and the place where he was like very dark, like night, like darkness with flame and fire, right? And so this light like really stood out, right? So this light appeared, this tunnel comes down, and there's a man walking down the tunnel of light. And my grandpa told me, right? And again, my grandpa was so Christian, right? I was surprised that he even admitted this, but he was just being sincere and just telling me the truth of what happened, right? He said that the guy never identified himself, right? The guy never said, "Oh, I'm Jesus." Like my grandpa, I could almost quote my grandpa. He basically said, like, well, he never identified who he was. He never said, "I'm Jesus." But my grandpa said, "But I knew and I felt that it was Jesus." Those are basically his exact words, right? So this man came up. He generally described me. He said, like, it looks like Jesus and blah blah blah, right? So like how Jesus stereotypically looks, right? And he just came up. He was wearing, like the robes, and I think he said he had like beard, dark hair, and that there, right? But he looked so like can't remember his exact words in this, but he had like very like soothing and like powerful and like beautiful regal type face. You know what I mean? And he looked like serene. Like that's the way so Jesus, this guy didn't come down looking scared or angry. He just came down with like this tranquility and like power, and just came down this tunnel of light, came up to my grandfather. I can't remember what he said about the demons. Maybe they just ran away, or Jesus went like something like that, and they just like they fled or something, right? But Jesus came down. However it happened, the demons fled. They went away, and Jesus took my grandpa, and my grandpa told me that Jesus returned him to his body. So Jesus came, and again, the guy never said, "Hey, I'm Jesus," but my grandpa just felt that it was Jesus. Man, who else would it be, right? An angel, maybe, right? But um, so Jesus came and put my grandpa back in his body, and my grandpa said, "That's when I came back to life," right? I don't think my grandpa had like a speech, like some people usually say in these near death type experiences, although this is, well, you know what I mean, where, I'm giving you a second chance and all of that cliche type stuff people sometimes say, not taking away from it, right? I believe in second chances and stuff, but I don't recall that being said, right? My grandpa was just like, he put me back in my body and I came back to life. And I'm just sitting there thinking, like, he's got 15% heart right now, heart tissue alive, and he's telling me this. That kind of like backs up what he's saying, right? That he was put back in his body and brought back to life for some purpose that God had, obviously, right? Now, the crazy thing is this, right? That was pretty much the story, right? And he was very scared about the demons and the hell and all of that. But he was like overjoyed with how this man rescued him. But I had literally the night before said that prayer to God, like the mega prayer, because my grandpa could die someday. And then that night he has a mega heart attack and basically dies, goes to hell or Hades temporarily for some reason, and then is rescued by Jesus, which is exactly what I prayed for if he was to go through that. I didn't tell my grandpa my prayer. I said that prayer myself. There's no way, okay? Like, this is a divine miracle. Like, I meticulously asked God for those specific things. If my grandpa has to go through hell, Hades, demons of fire for however long, short, temporary, for whatever reason, please be with him. Please come rescue him. Please don't let him be stuck there or have to endure it. Please, forgive him and this and that there. And then it actually happened. Totally out of my control, totally out of my grandpa's control. I'm quite sure he didn't want that heart attack. But so that within itself is a divine miracle, right? So that's proof that God does hear prayers and that he can answer them. Well, he can do whatever. I'm just saying that he does answer them. But he doesn't answer every prayer, obviously, right? But this is evidence that he does hear them and can and does answer them. Okay? And not only that, it's proof that he and Jesus, or whoever being it was probably Jesus, that they do have this divine power over life and death, over the realms. Like, Jesus can just transcend the realms. Like, he just comes into wherever this was in hell or Hades and just appears in a tunnel of light, comes down, the big bad guys run away, and Jesus just picks up my grandpa, who is actually dead, like his body's basically dead, and then brings my grandpa's spirit and puts it back in his body and miraculously brings him back to life to live on 15% heart. Now, the next amazing thing, and this is amazing because even the doctors in the hospital and in the rest home that he went to were like perplexed by this. They said they'd never seen this. My grandpa went on to live, okay, for years after that, for like 3 or 4 more years. That's ridiculous. Now, obviously, he wasn't living on 15% heart. So we never took him back to get his heart analyzed, but obviously he's not living on 15% heart. His heart had to regenerate. Okay? It had to regenerate. So that, I don't know if that's normal. I don't know if hearts can regenerate after a massive heart attack when you're already 90 something years old. I don't know if that is normal, but all I can say is it seems very abnormal to me. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a heart surgeon, so I can't say for sure. But I'm pretty sure that the heart, from what I know, that the heart doesn't regenerate. You might get a little bit, but I mean, you're talking about 85% of your heart and you're in your 90s, 90 something years old, and 85% of your heart just died in a heart attack. And you got 15% left. You know what I mean? And even before the heart attack, you're old enough to possibly go at any time just from old age. It's not looking good, but yet he lived for years. So obviously, his heart must have regenerated. Okay, and he was in pretty good health. Actually, after all that happened, he had this youthfulness and jubilance, and he was 100% there in his head until the day that he died. Like, well, he started to get a little dementia type, like where he'd repeat things, but outside of repeating things, he was 100% there. He could do everything, had no problems psychologically in any way, intellectually, 100% there like that, right? And but he would, because remember, before he had the mega heart attack, he was having like small heart attacks, right? That led up to the big one. So those type of things, and strokes, and all the other things that come along with when you're that old, or when you start having those things, they will happen more frequently afterwards, generally, right? So to be expected, he did have episodes, they would call it, I guess, even after he came back from the hospital. Hey, he's still alive. He didn't die a few days after, like they said. He kept going, he kept living, and he kept living for a few more years, right? And he was doing very well. So we put him into the rest home at some point. I can't remember if it was right away or whatever. And he did great up in there. He was always cracking jokes with everybody. He was friends with everybody, always making people laugh. He had a great sense of humor and stuff. And like he would pretend that the ladies work at the home were his girlfriends, like just joking, like, oh, that's my girlfriend, and stuff like that there, and make the ladies laugh, right? But anyways, right, he was very funny. But he would have these episodes, and they told us like, oh, they used to call us up, but then they gave up calling us because it happened so often. So like every other day or every week or a few times a week, he would have an episode, whether it's a stroke, heart attack, aneurysm, blockage, don't know, but he would literally just go blunk, like he's dead, collapse on the floor. Even he never got broken bones, all right, but he would collapse on the floor or wherever he was. And when you get that old and stuff, there's something called do not resuscitate or please resuscitate. Apparently, my family didn't tell me this at first. He was under do not resuscitate. So they were under the order that if he does collapse down, to let him be and die, right? A lot of people don't know that scary reality. That's how life works, right? That's just how life works, right? I didn't know that till I got a bit older. It's kind of scary. I wouldn't want that for him, but that's what he wanted and agreed to. So I have to honor what my grandpa wanted. So the first few times it happens, or first a lot of times it happened, obviously, they go help him or whatever. I'm guessing, unless it's strictly do not resuscitate. I don't know. I wasn't there, but they would call us up and say, oh, he blah blah blah, and we would get all scared and worried and cry and come down to go see him. But then he'd be up and walking around. It's just like they would tell us like we've never seen anything like this before. Like he will have whatever episode it is, collapse down, look like he's dead, and then minutes, whatever, some period later, he'll just get back up again and be normal. And it's just like very strange. I don't know if they take his pulse, if they've ever said that he had no pulse. I can't remember. I don't know for sure. But there were times where the rest of him was convinced that he had died, like a bunch of times, and he just got back up. And he just kept doing that for years. So it's like my God. It's like God didn't want him to die yet and wanted to keep him going. So it's just crazy. I mean, all that's crazy. And even like I said before, inevitably he was due to die at some point, unless the end of days came before, but it didn't. So he was destined to die at some point, and I had always asked God so that he would go peacefully in his sleep. So apparently, my grandpa, we saw him like the day before or whatever. He's 100% perfectly great, normal, fine, like he could live another 10 years, right? Cracking jokes and everything. Um, he never even had like a walking stick, right? He could do everything himself. Apparently, what happened was he got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, take a pee or whatever, took a pee, walked back to his bed, laid down in the bed, put his head on the pillow, and then died. Just boom, peacefully, like zoop, light off, gone. That is a little strange too. You get up to go use the bathroom, come back, lay down, all peaceful and relaxed, close your eyes, go to sleep, boom, gone. So that's the best way to go, if you ask me, right? So God answered my prayer there as well. So I'm very grateful to God for that, and He did that with my grandmother as well. So, anyways, so thank you God for all that. But that's my testimony, and these type of things may not happen for everybody, but the thing is you don't have to worry about that. It's up to God. So if you're in need of life or death, type divine miracle, go right and ask God. Don't hold back. But if it doesn't happen, I'm very grateful that God did do these things, but He may not do it for everybody. You know what I mean? So you have to be prepared if He doesn't. But I am very, very grateful that He did. And he's done that for a lot of my family members, but not all of them. I've had loved ones who've died in tragic, terrible ways. I definitely can't say he's done that for everybody. But I'm not saying anything bad, not trying to be negative. You know what I mean? I'm just stating facts. So anyways, God bless you all. Thank you all for coming. Anyways, take care, folks. I do have to go somewhere right now, but it's Friday night, and I do plan on coming back and doing a bunch of videos. So I have a chance to make a lot of videos tonight. So for anybody around there now, that's what I'll do. So um, heart cells don't divide after childhood. Oh wow. Yeah, there's just no way. He was in such good health, cracking jokes. I mean, get if you can collapse on the floor to start with and get back up at 90 something years old by yourself, like the nurses see you collapse down. Oh, well, I guess he's gonna die today. You know, they obviously don't say it like that, right? And they're like, okay, do not resuscitate. Let's just come back a little bit. Then they come back around. He's gotten up and he's sitting down, sipping a cup of tea and eating a cookie. And they're like, ah, you know what I mean? If you can do that by yourself, you know what I mean? You're definitely at 90 something years old with no cane and walker and all that, then you're in pretty good health. You know what I mean? There's no way you could be in health like in a state like that at 15% heart. So that's what I'm thinking. His heart had to regenerate, or maybe the hospital is wrong. But I mean, they're looking at the scans, and he did legitimately have a mega heart attack. You could see the dead tissue and all that. So, but anyways, and he had lots of heart attacks leading up to that one. So it's not like the hospital just was drunk that night and looked at a x-ray scan after my grandpa had a lung infection and thought, oh, he had a heart attack when he didn't. It definitely wasn't that, trust me. He was in there for days or a week or whatever it was, or maybe even weeks, and they had to keep analyzing him and testing him, had him all these machines and all this and that there, and tons of medicine and everything. So anyways, take care, folks. God bless you all. Thanks for coming by.